happens when an audit stops being about the management system and starts becoming about personal beliefs. With ISO 14001-2026 placing climate change more visibly into Clause 4, conversations are getting a little louder, a little more charged, and sometimes a little too personal. But here's the line auditors must not cross. We're there to assess the systems and not advocate a position. Today we're talking about how to keep environmental audits professional, evidence-based, and grounded with what's actually in the requirements of the standard. Welcome to Lead the Standard. You are listening to Lead the Standard, a podcast where we talk ISO systems, auditing, and leadership in a way that reflects what actually happens in the workplace. I'm Kelly Taylor and I'm here with my co-host Jackie Stapleton. Hi Jackie, appreciate you putting the standard down again for us. Now Jackie, this one feels like a conversation a lot of auditors are having at the moment. ISO 14001-2026 has made climate change more visible in Clause 4. They made an amendment a little while ago, but the new revision is locking that in hard and firm. And I noticed that as soon as those words were mentioned, the tone in the room can shift a little bit. So a bit interesting, because the standard itself isn't asking anything dramatic, but a lot of people can bring a lot of personal belief into that climate change space very quickly. I think that's what we're going to unpack a little bit more today. So not the science, not the politics, but that professional boundary and what the organisations are actually required to do under Clause 4. And where does the auditor kind of need to stay firmly within their role? So you actually shared a story with me recently that actually captured how easily that line can be blurred. Did you want to talk us through what happened there?
And yeah, I was actually on the phone to another auditor a few weeks ago, and he was telling me that he had to go in suddenly and replace an auditor who'd basically been asked to leave. So I thought, oh, this is juicy. Tell me more.
Spill that tea. Go on.
It's because, and that's why I thought, well, once he'd finished telling his story, I thought, oh, this is a good segue to, what is 14,001 and all of this, big kerfuffle about climate change. And I know, and you mentioned the amendment as well. I think that's when the big kerfuffle started happening on LinkedIn. And, after my discussion with the auditor I was talking to, I thought, well, it isn't as prominent as people think it is, and it's not asking for you to, believe in it or be a skeptic, either or. But what had happened was obviously the certification auditor turned up. And, because this is Clause 4, they must have had their initial discussions, and it became quite heated quite quickly because the auditor was a very passionate advocate of climate change and was really pushing his position and his passion and his belief. The business owner was a skeptic. They had 14,001 implemented. They had an environmental management system that was conforming already. So it wasn't a new audit, a new certification. So, the business owner knew how important this was. However, when he pushed back to the auditor and said, well, no, climate change isn't an issue here, it doesn't impact the business, then, the auditor came back and it became a disagreement on beliefs, not the clause requirements. And I think I put in the actual article I wrote that, look, possibly people would agree that the auditor should have stayed in his lane more. But I also get that passion, but it's the same. Like we get this, and you and I have come across this in training as well. Safety people.
We love our
So
safety people, don't get us wrong.
yes, we do. We do. And safety people, particularly that come off the tools, because they're very operational. So, they get right down to the core of it. But then they sort of get mixed up in that, and they forget that they're systems auditors. Okay, so you've got to come up a step. It's yes, operations are within there, but it's not about legal requirements, as an example.
Yeah.
So, sorry. So on day one, the business owner did eventually, because it didn't get any better for some reason. It's really strange adult behavior, but anyway,
Not uncommon.
adult and professional behavior, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, the business owner asked if he could leave, and then obviously requested a different auditor. And then that was my colleague that, we have catch ups once a quarter and shoot the breeze about what's happening. And so, yeah, he had to go in and, obviously into a situation that really wasn't probably the calmest to start with. So yeah, he had to manage that situation. And that's why I thought I shared that story, because then it would allow us to explore the difference between, the passion, like, if you're a supporter of climate change, yes, and you're very passionate about it. And I know I have a husband like that, um, who's chained himself to things and all of those ridiculous things. But
He's grown out of it, to his credit. He's grown out of that.
yes, yes, it might have been his midlife crisis, but but when you're that passionate, it's very difficult, I think, to see reason. And I'm probably jealous in a way. I'd love to be that passionate about something. Oh wait, I
I
am.
was gonna
ISO
say,
standards.
um, uh, yeah.
Oh, it's these things right here. So boring, I know. But so that's why I thought, oh, this would be an interesting opportunity then to explore, because this is the conversation I had with my work colleague while we were on the phone. It's like, well, what does the standard actually say? So it says this. So, and really, the standard, and I'm probably going to say this as we work through it, it doesn't actually say you have to take a position on climate change. In fact, and particularly in the 2026 revision, so currently the FDIS, it's really termed as environmental conditions, and climate change is just one of them. So I won't spoil things, but I think we'll cover that as we go. But
Yeah.
I suppose leading into that, and you touched on it as well, Kelly, that when the original 2015 revision came out, no mention of climate change, right? Now, was that last February or the February
February
before that?
2024.
Oh, goodness. Okay, 2 years ago. Time flies. That's why I wasn't sure. So in February 2024, there was Amendment 1, and that's where the reference to climate change, like consider climate change, it was just like a one little sentence that was added on, I think, onto 4.1 and 4.2.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
For a
And
number of different standards, but there was a
oh, yes.
variation between
Yes.
the two.
Yes, you're right. So it wasn't just added to 14,001, it was added to 9,001, 45,001, food as well.
Yeah.
So, it was like this broad brush amendment. And now moving forward with the 2026 revision, currently in FDIS, they have expanded, or to me, probably made it clearer what on earth this random thing was that was just shoved at the end of that clause in 2024. So now they've had the full revision, they've had a chance to expand on it, and I'll share that with you shortly. So I think, as I said, it was a sort of a background concept, I guess, because, 14,001 has always talked about prevention of pollution and, environmental aspects and impacts. It's always been there, but in the background. And now, of course, it's so much more visible in the 2026 revision. So that's where the confusion has come in. So, as I mentioned before, look, the auditor that went in there, he knew his stuff, but obviously there was a line crossed. The organisation, as I said, was also conforming, so they were meeting the requirements of 14,001. But really, what happened, it was just sort of two people with two different opinions. Yeah, and this is what it is, opinions. It sort of collided with their professional roles, I guess. So, and that's when passion sort of overrides it. And 14,001, or clause 4.1, just seemed to be the initiator of this. So when you strip back clause 4, which is the focus for this, it isn't actually asking, I mentioned this before, organisations or auditors to take a position on climate change. It's completely not that at all. So please take your time to read this. It's really about supporting the broadness, the scope of the context, because that's what clause 4 is about, context. So it's dropping these different environmental conditions in, climate change being one of them, so you can have a broad consideration of your context. Okay, it's sort of like brainstorming. Oh, here's some points to consider. It's really all it's doing. Okay, so do you want me to go on to the first part?
Yeah,
Like
definitely. I've
clause
just pulled up the
4.1?
standard myself, so I'm cross-referencing
Yes.
what we're looking at
I've
here.
got it open as well because, of course, we're working on the new course content. So I just have it up handy enough. So look, I think I'm going through 4 different sections here just to let you know. The first 2, look, it is sort of clausy, all right? So don't fall asleep, because when I get to the third topic and the fourth, I think it is, it's well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
All right. But first, before we can understand what it means and what it looks like, we need to understand actually what the clauses say. So possibly, Kelly, you have the actual clause ready to then back me up or pull me up on, what I'm going to share in my own words about clause 4.1. Okay.
Right,
Okay.
you start. I'm just gonna take some notes.
Oh God, you're getting serious.
No,
Okay.
look, I've seen that there's some cross-referencing, and I'm working on a tricky one. So, all right, I'm good.
Okay.
Let's go.
Okay. Okay. So clause 4.1 does require the organisation to determine the external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and that affect its ability to achieve the intended outcomes of its environmental management system. Okay, so that's that overall sort of intent. The clause then makes it very clear that these issues shall include environmental conditions. So that's the key word that I mentioned. So they with this FDIS, they've used this term environmental conditions. And I actually even think, you can check as well, that there's a definition for environmental conditions. I could be wrong because it's all still new to me. That can affect the organisation. And climate change is explicitly listed as one of those conditions. That's it. There's others that are mentioned. So to me, this is demonstrating that climate change is not being elevated above everything else. It's something to consider as part of these environmental conditions. Okay, it's not saying it's just climate change and that's it. Okay, it's not being elevated above everything else at all. It's being treated exactly the same way as the other environmental conditions that Clause 4.1 lists, which are pollution levels, resource availability, biodiversity, ecosystem health. Did I miss any in there?
You got me going.
No, I think that's it. I'm looking at the standard now too.
That's right. I was looking at the definition.
Yeah.
There is
Oh, there is a definition?
Yep. Environmental condition is the state or characteristic of the environment as determined at a certain point in time.
Okay. That's a good add-on,
So
definitely.
sounds a little bit like your sampling. It's what we've
And
got
it's a
right now.
snapshot in time.
This
That's
is
right.
going to change, but right now, as we look in it, this is exactly what this looks like.
Exactly. But if you're in this clause, it is about, well, what's happening now, but you should also consider, well, what's planned, what has the potential, because the output of this is identifying risks and opportunities, right? So, what does have the potential to occur? Also, what has happened before that could also occur. So, you need to take into account all of those, I suppose, different snapshots in time as well, because it really is sort of like a risk assessment.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's really an input, isn't it? Well, one of the inputs. Climate change is just one of the inputs into understanding the context of your organization. It's not, it's not the be all and end all, and it's not an opinion.
No, no. What I've found interesting, sorry, I've got the FDIS and the 2015 revision up in front of me. This new section of the clause really is just the old second sentence expanded to give some of those examples. And it does link to an annex which expands on that even further, which it didn't do in the previous one. So it does list what some of those conditions could be, such as here's your examples. Whereas before it just says shall include environmental conditions being affected by or capable of affecting. So it really just has expanded that and then given some additional guidance in that annex.
Yeah, it should be making it clearer, right? It's giving us a little bit more direction than what that Amendment 1 gave us, because it was like just thrown in sort of like an overnight decision and there was no guidance provided. But you're right, now we've got the annex reference. And that is very helpful. I'm throwing the annex reference into the course content because they have aligned it to that clause specifically.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is our explanation of what 4.1 is actually stating. All right, now we also have clause 4.2, obviously. So that's around your interested parties and like what are their needs and expectations, essentially. And it sort of builds on the same logic, you could say. So once you've identified or determined or understood your environmental conditions as, supported by clause 4.1, then we need to determine, well, which interested parties are sort of wrapped up in those internal and external influences, what are relevant, and what are their expectations? What do they need as a result of understanding this influence? And of course, and this isn't a change, it was always in the 2015 revision, then which one of those become compliance obligations? Okay, so that's not new. It still leads into, well, which ones are compliance obligations? But again, climate change here is still not it's not a requirement, but it's an example of something interested parties may have expectations about. So what does it, is that in, it's in the notes,
It
isn't
is.
it?
It is.
Yes.
4.2C slightly expanded and says that you do need to address it within your EMS, which it didn't previously. And then, yeah, the notes
Yeah.
again, she said their expectations of relevant interested parties. And here are some examples. What's interesting there is that probably a good point to highlight for that other auditor is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, pretty sure the external auditor is not considered an interested party. Would that be fair? So his opinion does not need to
Well,
be considered in their EMS.
no. I guess you could consider the certification body an interested party. However, to what extent
Yeah,
do
exactly.
their needs and so at what level of risk, at what extent are their needs and expectations to be taken into consideration? Obviously, there's higher risk stuff that's around the actual production of your, service or product. Yeah.
You're listening to Lead the Standard. If you're ready to build real auditor competence, explore our practical range of courses at auditortrainingonline.com/courses.
Yeah. So, and I notice in that note, it is just environmental conditions again.
Yeah.
So it's,
Such as
and
it's
yeah,
purely an example.
and yes, climate change is just one of the environmental conditions to consider. So that's why I thought initially I wanted to break down clause 4.1 and 4.2, because these clauses are asking, I suppose, the organisation to do just three things. It obviously understand its context, and that's internal and external influences. And then as part of that context awareness and understanding, consider the environmental conditions as part of that. So those statements in 4.1 and 4.2 expand that context thinking that we didn't have in the current 2015 revision. And then, of course, it flows on to determining whether any interested party expectations flow from that. Okay, so they all link. I think maybe the main difference now is that we've actually got specific environmental conditions to consider. Of course, when we do this process for 4.1 and 4.2, there's things outside of environmental conditions that should also be considered in the context.
They're covered in the annex.
Yeah. Okay. So they because it's not just, and particularly because we're in 14,001 having this conversation, there's other external influences. It can be your suppliers, it can be your customers, it's your employees, it's regulators. So this isn't just about environmental conditions, right? So does that wrap that up? You think I've covered that? Because I do have breakdowns coming.
Yeah, I
Not
think
breakdown.
sorry, training for the Olympics. I think the biggest takeaway I've got from that point there is, as you said, it's not a requirement, and these are climate change has just slipped in as one of many examples. And I think people are probably already doing that for the most part. I think it's one of those things that they've just put it in black and white to tighten things up a little bit. But most organisations are probably already considering that within those conditions that they've identified already.
Very true. And I've got some different questions coming up
Yeah,
as
I
well
love
to
these.
help. Okay. But first, I wanted to share, and you'll see this little, I don't know what you call it, graphic thing here, like I'm on Wheel of Fortune, where it's got the overall intent of clause 4, which is what you and I, Kelly, have sort of broken down based on the absolute requirements. Okay, this is exactly, this is what the standards intent is. Oh, sorry, for clause 4. But then you've got this real world reality, and this is sort of where I take the conversation to, and it's more about weather events. Okay, and it was quite easy last year because, well, because, we're in southeast Queensland, we had a cyclone, first one for, I don't know, 50 years or something. So it was a big topic of discussion. And did it impact all of the business I audit? Is that right? Absolutely. They all had stories to tell of something different that had happened. Now, whether they believe in climate change or not, you don't even have to discuss that. Was there a cyclone? Was it very windy? Was it very wet? And how did that impact any part of the business?
Yeah.
And what have you put in place to mitigate that if it does happen again?
Yeah.
It's a simple discussion. And as I said, every single one of them had something new happen that they hadn't considered.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And I think this is where like kind of that risk, that whole risk assessment comes in, and the risk of the unknown. And I think, yeah, we do need to start considering that in these contexts as well.
absolutely, yep. This is something that happens, supply disruptions, of course, like if, roads were flooded, they couldn't get through. Where was I at recently? Oh, the audit I did just last month. They were waiting on supplies from somewhere in Sydney. I think they had a lot of rain
Yeah.
down there. So the truck that had their stuff on it was stuck on the road.
Yeah.
So they'd been waiting days for him to get through. So supply disruptions. Oh, energy costs. So the rise in energy costs. We actually had a guy here last week to get we're getting solar battery put in, and he was, look, it's a sales pitch too. I get that, but we all know, even in the last 12 months, because we were actually like had some subsidies from government, but then they took those away, and it's like, whoa, what's happened to our electricity bill? So it has that potential to continue to rise.
Yeah.
Of course, insurance. Whoa, have I got some stories to tell about that? I'm scared to get my next insurance premiums, considering how much I've had to claim on damage to two houses in the same area that got, it's absolutely ridiculous. Oh, and sorry, both were in the cyclone, but then here's another weather event: massive hailstones, like the size of, just smashed everything. It's $30,000 worth of damage. So
I got another
my
bigger, better
insurance
story, and I'm not
premiums,
sharing it.
yeah, my insurance is just going to go through the roof.
Yeah.
So
Shop
that's
around for insurance,
something.
people. This is the story.
It's
Yeah.
so, and this
PTSD.
is, in location that's never had it before.
Well,
Because Kelly's laughed at me because I said we never get hail here, because we never did.
she told me that the morning it happened. Look, we never get tornadoes in southeast Queensland, and here we are 2.5 years later, still
Yeah,
going through repairs. So,
yeah,
yeah, you need to acknowledge that things are changing. I was down at my parents' recently, and we had a week of 40 plus. I think the coolest it got overnight was 36 degrees. It's never happened.
fires.
Yeah, and the
Yeah,
fires. I remember as a child looking at the weather on the news going, "Oh my gosh, it's going to be 30. We're going to die. It's going to be so hot." And now the 40s are normal. Like,
yeah. Yeah. So it's changing, and whether you believe that's climate change or just climate changing,
yeah,
regardless, the discussion is these weather events.
yeah,
Okay. So, and and unfortunately we do have some, or more than some, to discuss and ask, well, how has that impacted you? Because then it feeds into, I think I've got listed the customer reliability expectations. So
Yes.
because we've had these delays, whether it be for supplies or our costs have had to increase, or we've had to put some new, engineering controls to prevent water ingress, or the roof got blown off, etc. Who's going to get impacted is your customer. So you've got to try and claw that back as well, and that's related to the operational side of it, because of course your operation side of it will have potentially interruptions.
Yeah, and this is something we've experienced here with firstly with me with the tornado, where I had extra time off because we didn't have power for extended period. Then we had I think probably 2/3 of the team last year with the cyclone didn't have the power. So we had to shuffle students and change a lot of things for that wasn't planned. And it does have that flow on effect, and people do get a little bit frustrated. I experienced the same thing as your client the other day. I'm waiting for some packages and things to be delivered that haven't arrived because of this, that, or the other in those changes. But I think what a lot of people don't consider in this is not just the organization, but and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, a lot of people, when they're looking at their EMS in this context, aren't considering the this well the impact or the access to them for their staff members, etc. So we've put in things here. We've had a battery installed a couple of weeks ago, and we've already, without even realizing it, we've used it saved us about 4 times in the last 2 weeks with the wind and everything we had over the weekend here in southeast Queensland. But I've got neighbours who couldn't get to work because of the flooding, and their business relies on them to get there. So this kind of changing climate, if we're going to call it that way, to leave some opinion out, really does go outside of just the boundaries of your doorstep. There are a lot of things that this whole changing climate factor brings in that people may not
There's that
necessarily.
flow on effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then I tagged on that this graphic that you can see, because an important, I suppose, output or consideration based on the story that initiated this was obviously, as an auditor, as a consultant, as someone implementing an EMS, you need to consider the actual requirements, of course, 4.1 and 4.2, which I hope Kelly and I have explained. But then to back that up, you do need to always be in your professional boundaries. Okay, which this shouldn't be any different, to be honest. So it's neutral questioning. It's not your opinion. Always be curious. That's what we're asking questions for. It's evidence-based discussion. So that's why I like using real events. As I said, unfortunately, we have had real events, but it gives it, funny enough, it gives it context for
Great if there was a
yeah,
clause in the standard about context in the
about
environment.
context. Yeah. So it just gives it context rather than just using a generic word. So, and it is not about our opinions. It never has been, and I've said that quite often. It's not our opinion at all. Okay. So I think that's a good visual, I guess, which leads into how I've sort of broken this down. I'm just reading what I said. The standard doesn't ask auditors or consultants to convince organisations that climate change is relevant. It asks us to test whether the organisation has considered it as part of their context, which sort of backs up what we're saying, Kelly, and can explain how it reached those conclusions. So that's why you have those discussions. How did the cyclone impact you? How did the fires impact you? Were you impacted by, that hailstorm? What happened? And if nothing happened, if it was like, nah, we hardly got anything here, well, they've considered it.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's really all this clause is
Mhm.
asking for. So, and you're just asking these questions, right? So instead of asking questions that have your opinions embedded within it, and have the potential for conflict as well, because that's not what we're there for. Anything that we come up with has to be backed up with facts, obviously, not our opinion. If we do that, our conversations, our audit interviews stay within the framework of Clause 4 and not the language of the clause, the language of the organisation that we're auditing.
Yeah.
And this is something, Kelly, you and I talk about all the time in our auditing, our lead auditor training. We're not there to recite what the standards or the clauses say. That's why I apologised initially that the first two bits were very clause focused, and I promised we'd get to normal language shortly, which is where we are. Now, these questions, and sometimes these questions have more than one question in them, which isn't what we should have, but they're just examples, and you can pull out what's relevant. These are the options. So as an example, have you had to change how you operate because of? So fill in the blank with either the heat wave that we had, whenever, storms, or the cyclone, or the flooding. Drought is something we haven't spoken, because it's been very dry here, high fire danger in southeast Queensland until the rain finally came. So anything extreme, okay, so insert that at the end. So you're actually, it's just, you're just having to talk about the weather.
Yeah.
Essentially,
Yeah.
and they'll share. So that client last month with the cyclone, they store a lot of stuff outside of their warehouse. Where did all that stuff end up in the cyclone? Not at the front of their warehouse.
Yeah, so hopefully indoors before, but probably
No.
down the road somewhere.
That's right. That's right. And that's when they realized, oh, we need to put something more secure in place outside.
Mm.
So, it was something that hadn't happened before. So they had to change how they operate. Another question is, and again, insert as relevant, have supply disruptions, have energy costs, has water availability, or has raw material shortages affected your planning or delivery? So again, you insert what may have been the impact. And these questions, they don't sound very natural how I'm doing it, but normally these would feed into each other as you're having the discussion. You'd bring it up, and then they go, oh yeah, you should have seen what happened, and or how I found out about the delay in a product at the audit I was on. I was at their stand up, so that was what the BDM had communicated. So it's just part. It's part of their day to day. Hello, that's exactly what I'm trying to explain. It's just it's something that's been interrupted by a weather event. So they're just managing it as they go. And of course, we talked about insurance as well. So, how's that impacting the business? Have they had to, cover the costs? Have they had to increase their own pricing? And then that feeds into customer expectations as well. So, there's changes. There's that flow on effect that we talked about. And it could also, these weather events or even seasonal changes, I guess. I have mentioned how it may change operationally, but operationally under that, you might have your maintenance schedule as well. You could have different work schedules also. You might run shifts. So it could impact that as well. How and when you move your product also. So how are you planning all of this around these disruptions? Has something already happened and how did it impact you? So you can see nowhere in there did I mention environmental conditions. Nowhere in there did I mention climate change. It's just the real stuff
Yeah.
that happens.
And I love that you've kind of tied it into weather events, because automatically we all think of like those extreme weather events that you were talking about. Like, it was snowing in Tasmania on Christmas Day. That's supposed to be summer here. That's very rare. So, and weather events is a really, as you said, tangible way to consider that what things are changing and are different, rather than everyone panicking because the icebergs are melting in Antarctica and that's going to
That's right.
impact this, that, and the other. We all know that that's happening, whether that's climate change or climate changing, as you said before. But it's not really something that people think of as tangible or directly with their business. But weather events do affect us in our organizations, not just where we are positioned, but yeah, those suppliers, they're in a completely different state, but getting those materials to that organization had that impact. So I think, I know it sounds really simplified, but I think that's a really good way for people to think about all of those added impacts there. Looking at the clause, it does say pollution levels, but we can all kind of manage our pollution levels in some way or another by, and it's something we all like to do anyway. But when you look at the availability of natural resources, well, those are impacted by weather events. You either can or can't mine, or you can or can't put them on a truck or a train. Climate change is that. Biodiversity and ecosystem health, that too is impacted by weather events. So I really like that umbrella term that you've put on it. That does give it a lot more context, but kind of helps people to be able to do some of that planning and think a little bit more broadly than climate change, what happened to the dinosaurs.
Yeah, that's right. And it feeds into the environmental aspects as well further down at Clause 612. But you know what? Because we're talking about snow, a recent weather event, maybe in the last month or so, was the snowfall in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So in Amsterdam at Schiphol, at the, I think it's one of the biggest airports in the world. There was, I think, 3,000 flights cancelled, and the rest of the world was wondering, say the airports in Canada that operate under exactly the same snowfall all year round. What are they, what's wrong with them? What are they doing? Why are they cancelling flights? It's because they've never had that amount of snow
Volume.
for so long. Their resources, their utilities, their equipment, they just don't have it. Whereas in Canada, they're used to it. That's just what they do.
Yeah.
But at Schiphol, it was like, no, we got nothing. We just can't get these planes up. So do you think whoever runs the Schiphol airport, do you think that they're sort of reassessing things at the moment?
They're, they're on the internet looking for snowplows.
Are there any cheap ones from Canada?
Funny, that's where we get our water helicopters and stuff from, our bushfire
Oh,
bombers. That's we get Canada's secondhand ones. But I'm laughing because last night, I don't know if anyone else is watching the Winter Olympics. The commentators were talking about how they can't move forward with some of the events because it's snowing. there's an irony, but they were talking about a similar thing. They had all of the volunteers out there with these tiny little snow shovels digging, and the commentators were laughing because just as quickly as they dig that path clear, the snow would come. Unseasonal amount of snow in that place at that time of year. So yeah, everything's changing. It's yeah. And I love, yeah, that analogy. If you've the same thing in different places looks different because one place is prepared and the other one is not. And this is helping us to be able to prepare much more effectively.
Absolutely. So that's my story for today. So I think, yeah, when I put this together, I thought to myself, well, really, it's not a summary here, it's a takeaway. Okay, that's the point of us sharing this. It's that ISO 14001, the 2026 revision, currently in FDIS, but will be in April, very soon, published. It isn't asking you to take a stance or position on climate change at all. Please get that out of your head. It's asking you to understand what's happening around the organisation. So remember context. Decide whether it matters to the way that you operate. Decide whether it impacts the decisions that you make on a day-to-day or even strategic level as well. It impacts supply chains also, operational conditions, customers, all the things that Kelly and I went through previously. So when auditors and consultants just stick to that, it's really just a conversation about the weather. But as I said, remember there's other stuff to consider when you're looking at your context. It's not just environmental conditions. So, but to start the conversation around these environmental conditions, we've got some examples up there. Look at the graphic that we put together just to, I don't know, lighten the mood a bit. Okay, so it keeps everything in control and it's professional. You're not sort of, that potential for conflict isn't rearing its head.
Yeah.
Because I have seen people's body language change in audits. As soon as I bring it up, I think, oh, here we go. But then we just have a talk about the weather and we go, oh man, really? Is that what happened? So, it just becomes so much more relatable for them. So, and if you don't stay there, this is when, just like the gentleman we talked about at the beginning, this is when you're going to be asked to leave.
Yeah, that's not something you want on your resume. That's very interesting.
No, not at all. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Kelly, now. So, but don't forget, anyone can follow this standard. Why don't you be the one to lead the standard?
Thank you, Jackie. We are going to wrap another episode of Lead the Standard right here. We have tackled something that's becoming increasingly relevant in not just ISO 14001 audits, and we're not looking at the science, as Jackie said, we're not looking at the politics, but those professional boundaries. My personal takeaway this week was really not even a takeaway. It's more of a kind of that re-emphasis is probably not the right word either. But again, being open-minded and being kind of, yeah, letting other people, don't let your opinions get in the way of those things. Listen to other people, take it on board, but be human, be a person, be approachable. Have those, as you said, to have those conversations. Sometimes the small talk gets more than the professional language. And I think we've talked about a podcast, another podcast that we've seen and heard that touches on that really well. So again, it's not telling you exactly what you're doing or being really specific. Climate change is just one of many things that's been added in there to give you some additional guidance. So yeah, really not much has changed. Just think about that professional and personal behaviours. Now, if this episode has you thinking that you do need to get fully across these changes in 14001 2026, you can register your interest for our ISO 14001 2015 to 2026 bridging course for our EMS specialists. I'll make sure that the link is in the show notes so you can get ahead of the release. We will be back in a couple of weeks with yet another episode to help you lead your audits with confidence, some clarity, and a little bit of professional judgment and I don't know, decorum, I think is the word we're after this week. So please do hit follow, turn on those notifications. And if today's episode did resonate with you, share it and leave us a review and leave some comments down below. So keen to hear from you all. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep leading the standard. Bye for now. Thanks, Jackie.
Bye.